7시에 시작한 게 엊그제래요. 자, 방금 전 같은데 벌써 1시간이 지났어요. 지금 7시 59분입니다. 제가 이제 스트리밍은 켰지만 수업은 8시부터 지금 시작하겠습니다. 안녕하세요. 또 바로 뵙네요. SAUK 김 실장입니다. 자, 계속되고 있는 저희 IELTS 컨텐츠인데요. 앞에 1부는 IELTS와 관련한 좀 전반적인 내용과 일반적인 팁이었다면 이번 2부는 IELTS 라이팅 앤 스피킹 고득점 비법입니다. 사실 우리 학생들 중에 대부분 IELTS 점수 4가지 밴드 중에 라이팅과 스피킹을 조금은 좀 어려워들 하세요. 참고로 저도 한 4개월 전에 IELTS를 봤는데 라이팅 점수가 제일 낮았습니다. 부끄럽게도 매일같이 스피킹을 얘기하고 있지만, 그러니까 영어로 이야기하는 삶을 살고 있는데도 불구하고 라이팅은 또 다른 얘기더라고요. 라이팅은 꼭 내가 이 시험을 높은 점수를 맞으려면 약간의 스킬이 필요해요. 그래서 그 비법이 필요하고요. 그래서 제가 오늘 우리 선생님께, 필리 선생님께 라이팅, 스피킹 고득점 비법을 한번 소개해드렸는데요. 1부도 물론 중요했지만 2부는 정말 우리 학생들 높은 점수를 받기 위해, 내가 만약에 IELTS 시험이 한 달 혹은 2달 안에 시험을 본다라고 하면은 반드시 2부는 필수입니다. 꼭 보세요. 자, 그럼 시작하겠습니다.
Okay everyone, and welcome back. So in the second part of this live stream, I'm going to go into more detail about the writing and the speaking parts of the IELTS test and how you guys can improve your score. Okay, so first we're going to start with the writing part of the test. So the writing test itself takes a combined 60 minutes, and there are 2 tasks. So task 1 is about 20 minutes, and you need to write at least 150 words. So the word about is very important because you can go less or you can go over. Right, but I would highly recommend that you keep on practicing and hone your skills and try to aim for less than 20 minutes. So then you'll have more time to complete task 2. That's only from me, that hasn't been proven, but in the past I've noticed that if you perfect task 1, if you can do this really accurately and really quickly, then you'll have more time for task 2, which is a lot more challenging and a lot more higher level. So you need to write at least 150 words. Task 2 is about 40 minutes. Again, about, you can go over or under depending upon how long it took you to complete task 1. And you need to write at least 250 words. It's important to remember that task 2 is worth 2 times the score as task 1, right? Twice as much as task 1. So for task 1, right, so you're going to get a graphic, right? So you need to look at a diagram or some data. It can be in a graph, it can be a table or a chart, and you need to look at the information and you need to present it in your own words. Okay, so this is basically testing your ability to interpret data and to describe data using your own language and your own words. Okay? So these are the types of graphics that you're going to get, right? So the first one in the top left, you can see this is a bar chart, right? And a very typical bar chart, so 2 subjects, and they're color-coded as well, or shaded in a different shade. And you need to interpret this data. And the second chart if we go over to the right, is a line graph. Okay, so a line graph and a bar chart are essentially the same thing, but presented differently, right? So you can see the line graph goes from left to right, and you can see the years increase from left to right, and you can see the y-axis goes from 0 to 100. So you're going to get some numbers, maybe some years, and you're going to get different types of lines. So in the bar chart, you get the shaded areas that represent two different items. And in the line graph, you get different types of lines, like a solid line, a dashed line, maybe a different color line, and so on. In the third chart, you can see a pie chart. So a pie chart is very similar to a line graph in terms of what it does, right? So you've got different chunks of the pie charts, and you need to interpret this data, you need to describe it. So then if we go to the bottom left, you can see a table that's got different countries and it's got the figures. And there's always a heading, right? It's very important to read the heading because that's the most important information. It tells you what the chart is about. And then we can see a map, and quite often you need to describe the differences between the maps, right? And I've noticed with Ielts, not only in the writing part but also the speaking part, the Ielts really like to contrast different times. So this is a very kind of useful way of extracting language, because when you compare different time zones or different time eras, you need to use the language of past and present. Okay, so that's what it's asking you to do in this map. It's asking you to describe the differences from the map 10 years ago and now what's changed, right? So you're using different language to describe the past and the present, the contrast. And then in the last type of graph or graphic, you get a diagram. This is usually a process, right? And you need to describe the process. So with every graphic here, you need to use different language to describe what's happening and describe what you can see. But with task one, with practice, you can get very good at answering the questions, especially structuring the questions. You can get very good at using expressions and to use the language that is already in the graphics itself. And with practice, you can get very good, get a very good score, but at the same time answer fairly quickly within the 20-minute time frame. Okay, and this all comes with practice. Knowing how to structure your answer, first of all, generating ideas and understanding a kind of map how you can answer these questions, and the kind of language that you need to use to get a good score. So task one is going to assess your ability, and it's going to assess your ability to organize information, right? With all the graphics, you see so many numbers and different parts of a graphic, different, like a diagram, a map, a pie chart. You see different numbers, different items, different countries, and your task is to organize, right? Maybe from biggest to smallest, maybe from smallest to biggest, longest to shortest, the most to the least. And you're using this language to organize the information, make a structure. So what I teach to my students is, first of all, you need an introduction that paraphrases the question. So you don't need to use any new language. You just paraphrase what is given in the introduction. Then you need to present the information. Okay. So you're asked to comment on certain features of a graphic, And you need to present this, right? What stands out the most, right? If you compare two lines on a line graph, what stands out the most? Sometimes you need to compare, right? So this can be anything like the pie charts. You've got two pie charts and you're asked to compare the pie charts where the features are significant, right? What stands out for you? What is the biggest difference between the two pie charts? So in this type of question, you're asked to use comparative language, maybe some superlatives like the most, the biggest, or the least. Okay, so sometimes you're asked to compare pie charts or maybe maps like you saw in the graphic before. You saw the time frames, the time between the different maps, and you're asked to compare the different maps based upon the time. Or you might be able to describe what you can see, describe the information, describe the process, or describe the stages of a process, which would be in the diagram type of question. You might need to explain an object or an event, right? You might need to describe what you can see. Or you might need to describe an event, like organizing an event. Or maybe to explain how something works. So yeah, in task 1, you can get a very good score if you practice, first of all, the structure. And that's what I teach, is to first of all make a structure and to practice the kind of language that is needed to make a good structure, and also to understand each of these different graphics, to understand them in detail and understand what the question is asking and how to get a good answer. So with task 2, you're presented, for example, with a point of view, an argument or a problem, right? So a point of view, do you agree or disagree? An argument or a problem. So in this task, you're going to be assessed on your ability to present a solution to a problem. Okay, and this requires you to have quite a creative approach to the language. Okay, and also there's a greater amount of expressions that you need to use in task 2, maybe compared to task 1. Especially with presenting a solution to a problem, you need to be creative with your solution, what you believe, and don't be afraid to use your own language, right? It's asking for your opinion. Present a solution to a problem. You might present and justify an opinion. So you're given an opinion, but why do you think this way? You need to justify. And to justify, you need to use examples, data, statistics, references, and so on. And with the writing part, I think a lot of students are worried that if they use references, maybe the examiner is going to check, and if it's wrong, you're going to get a lower score, right? That isn't the case, right? You can make up references, and I would highly encourage you to do so. But to make references, you need certain language, and it's that language that's going to get you a higher score. Okay, so first of all, you need to think about the structure. You've got your opinion, but why do you think this way? You need to justify your opinion, and you do that with examples, and you need to know the language in order to give examples. You can use references. And there's different ways to introduce a reference, and also there's different types of references, right? So that's what you need to learn, is the language that is used in referencing. Also data and statistics. Okay, this is all going to get you a higher score in the writing. You might be asked to compare and contrast evidence and opinions, right? So it's asking you again to use your own language. What do you think? That's That's what we want to know, what you think, comparisons and differences in the evidence. You might be asked to evaluate and challenge ideas, right? So how strong do you think this idea is? Evaluate the idea. Why is it important? Challenge the idea. Do you think this is a good idea or a bad idea? And why do you think so? Give evidence or arguments, right? So that's basically what task 2 is building your own argument. So when you do build an argument, the structure is kind of the first thing you need to think about. How do you approach the answer? How do you introduce your answer? And in the body of your answer, how do you structure the body as well? So when we answer these types of questions, we need to use certain language, and it's this language that is going to increase your score. So the type of language that the examiner is looking for is increase and decrease language, right? So there's lots of different expressions that are used in increase and decrease, and to use these accurately in answering the question. Fluctuation. So fluctuation is when we have an increase and a decrease, an increase and a decrease again. Okay, it's fluctuating. And there's different expressions that we can use to describe the fluctuation in, for example, a line graph. It decreases, it increases, it fluctuates. And also there's language to compare as well, expressions and language to compare different sets of data. And also ratio. Okay, so this deals with fractions. 1 in 5 people like to watch dramas on TV, right? So there's also language that you can use to describe a ratio. Maybe there's a percentage as well, like maybe like 55% of boys prefer blue and things like this kind of language. And also stability. So this type of language isn't really used that much, you might have thought, but stability language, like it remains fairly constant, right? It's got a flat line, right? So you're actually using adjectives to describe the actual stability of the line, or maybe a bar chart. You're using language to describe like a flat line, it's stable. And then process. For this you need like a sequencing signals, like first, second, third, and after that, before. There's so many that you can use to describe a process. Something that changes, maybe the data has a significant change, and there's a big change, there's a big drop, there's a big increase, right? So the data changes and you need to use language to describe the change. And also location. For this you use prepositions. So using accurate prepositions to describe where something is accurately. That's the kind of language that the examiner is looking for. And to practice all of these, language in certain situations takes time, it takes practice to get to know what language can I use to answer this certain question specifically. Okay, and that's what we teach. We teach you how to use language in specific answers. Okay, so let's move on to the speaking. And the speaking is the last part of the Ielts test. And by this time, you're probably going to be fairly tired, okay? But the good news is that the speaking is the shortest test amongst all of the writing, the listening and the reading. So the speaking test only lasts for a maximum of 14 minutes. So it lasts, we say about 14 minutes, it can last less than 14 minutes. Between 11 and 14 minutes is the exact time. And in the speaking part, there are three parts. So I like to divide part 1 into two subsections, right? So I'm going to call this part 1A. So before you enter the room, you need to register your fingerprint to make sure that it's you. And you need to have your passport again. Make sure you've got your passport, don't forget it. And the examiner is going to be waiting there at the door of the room with the recording device turned on, right? So the test has been recorded even before you enter the room. So the examiner is going to welcome you to the room and tell you where to sit. And he's going to make sure that you're aware that the speaking test has been recorded. And then the recording device is placed down. And the examiner will read out some introduction information. This is going to include your name, your candidate number, where the test is taking place, and to check your identification number to make sure it's you. And then they're going to go into part 1, which is some information about yourself, some fairly basic information and some questions that are very simple and very easy. So part 1 is divided into two subsections. It's going to like have a fork. And the first part is going to maybe ask you where you live, or it's going to ask you what you do. Are you a student or do you work? Right? So these are completely random. Okay, you never know what question you're going to get. Completely and absolutely random. Okay, so where do you live? Maybe it's going to ask you to talk about your house, maybe your room, anything about your house, your neighborhood. It can be anything about where you live, maybe some shops. Yeah, maybe your rooms in your house, what you can see from the windows, that kind of thing, right? Where you live. Or the question might ask you what you do. So I guess all of you guys are students. So being a student, what questions can you get being a student? What do you study? Where do you study? How long do you study? Why did you choose your major? What do you think you'll do in the future? So these questions are very easy for you to answer. So here's some tips for part 1. First of all, keep your answers short, right? The examiner is not going to base your score on part 1A, right? Maybe 3 to 4 sentences is perfectly fine. Okay. So again, is going to ask either about where you live or what you do, right? Not both, right? Either one. And it's completely random which question set that you get. So that's part 1A. And remember to keep your answers short. Maybe 3 to 4 sentences is fine. That's the best. So then part 1 goes into B. Okay, and in part 1B, you're going to be asked also some very familiar questions about random topics. These random topics can be anything. They can be about cars, they can be about planes, about buildings, about the weather, about clothes, relationships, about family, about photos. You know, it's just endless. It's basically, I think, what you would talk about if you go to a coffee shop with your friend, right? It's a random topic. So there are a number of topics that the examiner randomly chooses, and you're going to be asked 2 topics, right? So let's say, for example, about clothes and about cars, right? So the first topic about clothes, there are 4 questions that the examiner is going to ask you about clothes. I mean, what clothes do you wear most often? Or what clothes did you wear when you were younger? So again, the Ielts test really likes to contrast the past and the present, right? So maybe a typical question about clothes would be, have the clothes you worn when you were younger, are different from what you wear today, right? So they love that type of question, comparing the past to the present. So you're going to be asked 4 questions per topic, and there are 2 topics. Okay, and don't worry if you don't have time to answer every question in the topic, right? So, but you must answer the 4 questions of the first topic. With the second topic, if there's not enough time, I mean, you don't get to see the timer as well. You don't know how much time is left. The examiner is going to direct you to the next question, and that's what we're trained to do, to allow you equal amounts of time on each question. So sometimes, well, quite often it happens that you don't have enough time to answer 4 questions of the next topic. That's not going to affect your score whatsoever at all, okay? Your job as a candidate is to answer the questions, okay? And that's all you've got to be worried about, is answering the questions. So in part 1B, you're going to be asked a maximum of 8 questions, right? 4 for each topic. And they're random topics, completely random. Even for me, they're completely random. Okay, so at the beginning of each test, I randomly select any topic, 2 topics. And also the best way to practice this is that there's so many practices online these days. You can go on the internet and you can find random topics and try to talk about them. Yeah, so I just want to go back to this. Yeah, so with these questions, you should be aiming to answer in about 5 sentences, and always justify your answer. So, for example, what clothes do you like to wear on a summer day? Right, so I like to wear t-shirts and shorts. If you stop there, the examiner is going to ask you why. Okay, and that's all the examiner is allowed to ask, why. Okay, and then you need to justify your answer. Because it's hot, it's humid, and I feel more comfortable wearing this type of clothing. And I think like t-shirts and shorts can be quite fashionable in summer, and I like to show off. Okay, so that's perfectly fine to do that. In part 1, if you don't understand what the examiner said, you are allowed to ask the examiner to repeat. Okay, you just say, could you repeat the question, please? Okay, the examiner is going to repeat it word for word, and the examiner is only allowed to do this once. Okay, if you don't understand a word as well, you can ask, what does this word mean? Right, you can ask that, that's okay. So some questions are kind of, you don't understand the word in Korea because you're not familiar with the kind of topic, then ask the examiner, what do you mean? Okay, and can you repeat the question, please? Okay, so part 1 and 1A and B, they last for about 5 minutes. Okay, it's very quick, right? So you should be aiming to answer in about 4 or 5 sentences in part 1. Then some tips in part 1. Give your answer. Always justify your answer. Always do this. If you don't justify, the examiner is going to ask you why. Right? Why do you think so? Why? Use transitional signals like firstly and then and next. I remember a time when. What I mean by this is, however, things like this are going to increase your coherence score and also your vocabulary. Right, so try to answer in about 3 to 5 sentences, right? Don't answer really long and keep on going on and on and on, right? Keep it fairly short, in about 3 to 5 sentences. So then we will go into part 2. Okay, so don't worry if you don't have time to answer everything in part 1. The examiner will stop you and the examiner will say, now I'm going to give you a topic, right? And the topic the examiner will give you is completely random, okay? I don't know even what topic you're going to get. So the topic is written on what they call a task card, right? You get this card and the examiner will physically give it to you, right? So the examiner will say, here's your topic, and you'll get a small piece of paper about this size to write some notes on, and then the examiner will read out the question. Okay, and this is where you need to really focus and concentrate and pay attention. I think almost every question starts with describe, and then it goes on with the question. Okay, so the examiner will read the question. Once the examiner has finished reading the question, that's when the timer will start. That's when you've got 1 minute to write some notes and think about what you're going to say. Right, so one of my good tips is that once the examiner immediately finishes reading the question, that's when you've got to switch on and think about what you're going to say. The 1 minute that you do get goes very, 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 very quickly. Okay, so the saving a second is important. So once the examiner finishes describe and the question, that's when you've got 1 minute, when the question is finished. Okay, and it's up to you how to use that 1 minute, and but I would suggest organizing your ideas, right? You don't have time to write sentences, write in note form, and you don't even need to write in English. You can write in Korean or your own language, but I would recommend you to write in English so that you don't get the language confused. Okay, I've found out through experience that a lot of candidates don't realize that their 1 minute starts at the end of that question. And they ask me, is the 1 minute starting from now? Well, actually, in fact, it hasn't. You know, the time it's taken you to ask that question, maybe 5-6 seconds, that's already gone. Okay, so that's why it's so important. As once the examiner finishes reading the question, that's when the 1 minute starts. So once the 1 minute is finished, the examiner is going to say, like, all right, you've got 2 minutes for this, and continue speaking for as long as you can. And the examiner is going to say, can you start speaking now, please? Okay, and the word now is when the 2 minutes starts, right? Again, don't say, is it started yet? Because that's going to eat in your time, that's going to eat away your time. So with the 2 minutes, you need to continue speaking, and that's very, very important, right? Don't stop, just continue speaking, and the examiner is going to tell you when the time is up, okay? Don't try to guess when the time is up. 2 minutes might seem like a lifetime, okay? But believe me, there is only 2 minutes, and the examiner will tell you when the time is up, and it's actually written in the instructions. I will tell you when the time is up. Okay, and so continue speaking, that's all you need to worry about, and be spontaneous, develop your answers as well. So the examiner is looking for the continual speech without hesitation. With hesitation, I mean pauses in the middle of sentences. Pauses at the beginning of sentences are fine. That means that you're trying to think of something to say, you're trying to think of the vocabulary to say. But pauses in the middle of sentences might be a problem, because that's when you don't know what vocabulary to use. And that separates like the level 5 and 6. So continue speaking, be spontaneous. If you think of an idea, say it and then develop it. Okay, and practice speaking. Record yourself on your phones. You've all got the recording devices these days on phones. Record yourself. Search for past questions on the internet. It's very easy. And then record yourself on the phone talking continually for 2 minutes. And then gradually, over a periods of time and experience, you'll get better and better and better. Yeah, so again, in part 2, you will get 1 minute to think about what you will say. This is the golden minute. It goes by like lightning. It goes by so quickly. Write some notes, right? Don't write sentences, don't write an essay, just write notes, note form. And then you need to talk for 2 minutes, continually 2 minutes. So part 2 tips, right? Continue speaking. That's the biggest tip. Don't stop, continue. Use transition signals, again, to introduce and link ideas together, link your sentences together. This is where your writing also will help you with your speaking. We use transitions in writing to introduce your ideas and to link ideas together. You can also use this in your speaking. And also imagine the story you are describing. Imagine it in your mind. It really helps because your mind is connected to your voice. Okay, so try to imagine. You don't need to look the examiner in the eye as well. You can look at your paper as well. You have the paper in front of you to look at. Okay, so try to imagine your story and also use your hands as well. Using your hands maybe guides you through the story. Okay, so anything that can help you continue speaking for 2 minutes will be a bonus. Then, after your 2-minute speech, the examiner is probably going to say thank you, like this, and then the examiner will ask you a question. And this question is a simple yes/no answer. Yes, I have. No, I haven't, right? This is called like a rounding off question, and it's a good way to link part 2 to part 3. Okay, so with this question, you shouldn't give a very long answer, right? The answer should be very short. 1 word, yes or no, because it's not related to your score. Okay, it's just a good way to finish part 2 and then move on to part 3. So in part 3, the questions that the examiner will ask you are related to part 2. The topic is loosely, I'd say loosely related. It's not directly related, kind of loosely in a general term. So we're kind of continuing the conversation, right? So now it's a chance for you to shine and for you to show your language abilities. So in part 3, it's more like a discussion, like a 2-way discussion. So the examiner will ask you questions and like probably ask you follow-up questions, like why do you think so? How come? What do you mean by this? Right, so it's more like a friendly, like 2-way discussion. Okay, so it gives you a chance to really develop your language, and the whole point of this part is for you to reach the very, very maximum of your language ability. That's what the Ielts test is all about, for you to show your very maximum ability, and that's what the examiner wants you to do, and that's what the examiner is trying to help you to do. So in part 3, you're asked more kind of advanced level questions connected to part 2. So it starts off with fairly easy questions, and then it gets gradually more challenging and more higher level, more complex questions. And the more complex questions that you get asked, the more complex language that you need to use in order to answer these questions. Okay, maybe a government, what do you think, how can governments help this situation? Do you think this is a problem in society? Okay, it asks you like a bigger picture questions, and also in part 3 asks you to contrast the past and the present, maybe old people and young people, maybe boys and girls, gender difference, age difference, time difference. So it's asking you the whole range of your language. So part 3 tips I would say develop your answers, right? This is a chance for you to show the examiner your full range of language, right? So there's no time limit, there's no sentence limit. It's up to you to develop your answer. And that's what the examiner would like you to do. And also to spontaneously answer a follow-up question, right? To expand your answer, right? So it's given you every opportunity to show the examiner your language skills, okay? And that's what you should be interested in, to show the examiner, yes, this is why I deserve this score, right? Show the examiner your full range of vocabulary and your full range of fluency, your coherency, your grammar, everything, your pronunciation. So you want to show your vocabulary, let it shine through, like idioms and collocations and paraphrases, right? Use collocations. If you don't know collocations, look on the internet. There's a full list of collocations. There's hundreds and thousands that we use. And quite often you use collocations naturally, right? So, oh yeah, if you go on the internet, oh yeah, I know this. I use this every day, these collocations. I get up, I go out. These are all collocations, right? Also be understanding of the transitions as well, how to introduce your ideas, these expressions that you need to use. And be fluent. So I think fluency comes with being relaxed. Okay, don't panic. Be fluent, continue speaking, and don't stop, and make it a discussion as well. So this is what the examiner is going to assess you on. This is going to be your score. So first of all, fluency and coherency. So fluency is concerned with your ability to continue speaking at length. And the further the test goes, the higher the level the questions are, so the more difficulty the fluency becomes, right? So the fluency is basically not hesitating in mid-sentence, it's not repeating yourself, it's not relying on repetitive language, and your speech isn't slow to think about words, right? So this is to do with fluency, and coherency is introducing with expressions your ideas. It's developing your answers, using the language to develop answers. It's linking your ideas together as well. So fluency and coherency, they go together hand in hand, right? So practice speaking, right? Really use your cell phone and record yourself for 2 minutes and play back and think, am I fluent? Am I hesitating? Am I pausing? Am I repeating? Right, listen to yourself and your coherency as well. Am I using transitions to introduce my ideas? Am I using expressions? So also lexical resource. So this is your ability to answer with the accurate vocabulary, familiar questions, like easy questions that you would normally talk about in coffee shops. These topics of clothes, yeah, maybe even coffee, the type of food, drinks, everyday topics that we easily have the vocabulary to answer. But then non-familiar questions, like questions related to, I don't know, how government responds to a crisis, things like this, in English as well. So having the vocabulary range to answer easy everyday topics, like you would have a discussion in a coffee shop, to non-familiar topics that you would be discussing with some academic professor. So that's the vocabulary side of lexical resource. Also, paraphrasing is very important. So paraphrase is your ability to describe a word without actually knowing the exact word it is. So once you get speaking, you're thinking of these academic words. But if for some reason you have a mental block and you can't access the academic word, then you describe it, right? So this is called paraphrasing, right? Especially in speaking, paraphrasing. So you kind of talk around the subject, right? So you talk around the subject so the examiner understands, oh, okay, that's what you're talking about. And it's a very, very useful skill no matter what the language is, okay? Especially in English, is your ability in the end, this is what the whole purpose of a speaking test is, it's your ability to communicate. And to communicate, we often need to paraphrase. I don't understand what this is, but I'm going to explain it, I'm going to describe it. Okay, so having the ability to paraphrase is what lexical resource is all about. And as I mentioned before, the ability to use collocations in your answer, and also to use idioms. Okay, so English and every language has these phrases that have a particular meaning. And English has lots and lots of these idioms, so they're no secret, they're all on the internet. And I also teach some of the idioms that you can use in different situations and their exact specific meaning. So having the idiomatic expressions will help you have a good score in the lexical resource. But the essence of this criteria is having the vocabulary to answer like easy questions and also advanced higher questions. So grammatical range and accuracy. So this is concerned with having, like in English we use 3 different sentence types. There's simple, compound and complex. So complex is using subordination. It's using the expressions used in coherency but accurately in grammar. So you need to use expressions or subordinate, they're called subordinate coordinators. This is the fancy word to mean however, therefore, thus, and so on, ultimately, undoubtedly. These types of words are subordinators. And for you to use them in a sentence means that you're using complex sentence structures. And that's what the examiner is looking for. Your ability to use complex sentence structures accurately. And also your simple sentence structures are using subject, verb, object. And so the grammatical accuracy, you're allowed to have a few mistakes. Okay, so every speaker, even native speakers, make grammatical mistakes when speaking because of the time we have to process all the information and to speak what we want to speak, what we're thinking about. Okay, so you are allowed to have a degree of errors in grammatical accuracy. And don't be afraid of making errors, okay? And don't dwell on errors thinking, oh, I made a mistake, damn, this is my test finished. Don't think like that, right? You're allowed to make grammatical mistakes. So the last criteria is about pronunciation. And pronunciation for me is if I can understand you without too much effort, then you're going to, get a fairly good score with the pronunciation. So with Koreans, like you've been drilled in pronunciation basically from kindergarten, right? So I don't think you need to worry too much about pronunciation. But that doesn't say that you should ignore pronunciation. You should look on the internet and find the most common mispronounced words for Koreans, and you can find a whole list. One of these is, I would say, finished, right, with the ED inflection. So finished. and not finished or changed and not changed. These types of words. Okay. But again, I don't think that's much of a problem that you need to worry about with the pronunciation. I would invite you to ask any questions about either the writing or the speaking part of the test, or about IELTS in general, and I'll try my best to answer them. So if you do have any questions you want to ask, please write them in the chat box and I'll be happy to answer them. So over to you. If you've got any questions, please write them in the chat box. If you're wondering about something, please write it down. Okay everyone, so thank you for joining this live stream. I hope it's been educational and informative for you guys. What I try to teach with the IELTS, especially in the writing and the speaking, is a way how you can reach your potential, and you can only do that through practice, okay? And that's what the IELTS is all about. Okay, just try to reach your potential. Okay, so thank you guys. I hope to see you soon, maybe, and thank you for joining the live stream. Okay, bye bye everyone. Thank you.